Hi, and welcome to the Center for Innovative Practices, Innovative Conversations. I'm your host today, Patrick Canary, and I have two terrific guests here to talk about intensive home-based treatment and solution-focused therapy. Our first guest is Dr. Ann Lutz, and Ann is the director of the Institute for Solution-Focused Therapy. She is a board-certified adult, child, and adolescent psychiatrist and was a nurse prior to becoming a physician. Ann is also an assistant professor in psychiatry at the University of Massachusetts in Worcester, Mass, and a visiting professor at Framingham State University. Ann has worked for many years in the community mental health setting and as a consulting psychiatrist for residential treatment centers for adolescent girls coping with substance abuse disorders and co-occurring disorders. Our other guest today is Dr. Rick Shepler. And Rick is the director of the Center for Innovative Practices located at the Begun Center at Case Western Reserve University. So welcome to you both, and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about intensive home-based treatment, and that's the slide that everybody should be seeing at this point. And Rick's going to just give us kind of a brief history of that intervention, excuse me, where things are in Ohio, and then how that links and bridges to solution-focused therapy. And that's where Ann will jump in. And it's important to note that Dr. Lutz will be coming to Ohio April 25th and 26th in Columbus for a two-day training. And we will provide information at the end of this webinar on how to link into that and register for her training. So, Rick, I'm wondering if you could just give us that brief history, little bit of definition around intensive home-based treatment. It's now joined our Medicaid menu here in Ohio, but that's been a long journey.
I'll be happy to, Patrick. In Ohio, we began implementing intensive home-based treatment actually back in the 80s, 1986 to be exact. So we have been in various forms over the years implementing intensive home-based now. The origin of home-based in Ohio actually started with the home builders model way back in the day. It was really the only home-based model at the time. And many of the states were implementing that model, but having to adapt it for a mental health population. We did that in Ohio. We built into the home builders model a family systems component, an individual therapy component that went above and beyond what the initial home builders model gave us. And we also extended the time frame of the model itself. Fast forward from 1986 to 2000, we worked as a state to put the home-based model into a rule. And fast forward to 2018, wow, yeah. We got it in the Medicaid statute. So we're real pleased about that right now. We are implementing intensive home-based as a rule in Ohio and getting reimbursed by Medicaid. And so for us, that's a major achievement. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, for the youth and the families. Why is this service important? The service is important because it's a service that is delivered in the home and community where the child and the family live and function for the purpose of keeping the youth in a least restrictive environment, the most normative environment, i.e. the home and the school and neighborhood where that child lives. It's probably the highest level of care prior to placement in hospitalization, residential. These programs are 3 to 6 months long. It is meant to be a comprehensive treatment service delivered in the home, and that would include practicing up and down as a clinician, individual, family work, case management, care coordination work, crisis intervention, crisis stabilization work, all within the umbrella of a system of care set of principles. Many people don't recognize the fact that when intensive home base was first developed, it was implemented as part of many system of care programs back in the day, and it incorporates all of the system of care principles. And it also embraces a resiliency-oriented developmental approach. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute, because I think it really ties closely to a very strengths-based focused and a solution-based focus as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the outcomes that you expect from IHBT, and what's the research supporting in-home work, particularly for this population of youth and their families?
Sure. The outcomes that we're looking for in intensive home-based are obviously child remains in the home at the end of treatment and post-treatment, that there is a significant improvement in mental health functioning, in family functioning, that they're in school, that they're getting passing grades, that there are there's no new system involvement. So that could take the form of juvenile justice charges, misdemeanor felony charges. It could take the form of child welfare involvement, new child abuse charges. So our job is to increase function not only with the youth but in the family, so that cross-system involvement decreases in a sense of negative involvement for that youth, and their functioning increases. In terms of the research, the best research we have is actually through multisystemic therapy, and it's the gold standard of treatment, but it also uses an intensive home-based treatment model approach. And some other pieces that go into that approach, which are similar, are being on call to the family 24/7 as a home-based team, very intensive treatment service delivery while involved. And what I mean by that is 2 to 4 sessions a week, multi-houred sessions with the youth. The family may be delivered in the school, mostly delivered in the home. And very intensive supervision as well. And so these models have a lot in common, and they're brief interventions. Again, another thing that is probably in common with solution-focused therapy.
Well, and I know that part of the work of the Center for Innovative Practices is to help support clinicians in their direct practice. And so the training that Dr. Lutz is bringing to Ohio is part of that. So this is a great opportunity for folks who are practitioners of in-home treatment services to have another tool or resource available to them. So I'm gonna segue to Ann.
Let me do one other thing before you do that, and then we can. One of the things that was really interesting, Ann, is that we early on, actually in the late 80s and 90s, realized that solution-focused therapy was a really nice match with home-based, to the point where I forget what year it was, maybe 1990 or 91. We brought in Insoo Kim Berg to do a training, and then followed up by Matthew Seligman and a number of other folks that were either structural family therapists or solution focused, to help train the initial swath of folks doing the work. And so we've been a big fan of how this solution focus fits. So sorry, Patrick, I just want to mention that.
No, that's great. That's a great bridge. So Ann, I'm going to kind of ask you to do a kind of a similar overview that Rick did on solution focused therapy, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how you all see those interventions complementing each other. So if you could give us kind of your brief history.
So I'm just, first of all, am very appreciative of being invited to this opportunity. I think it's so exciting when there's agencies invested in engaging with their whole agency and all their clinicians, to have sort of everyone learning this at the same time. I was fortunate to learn this through INSU, actually, and Steve, because I did my training, my adult psychiatry training in Milwaukee. So was very, very lucky to learn from INSU. She always makes me smile. But I view this, I love gardening. And on my slide there, you see many seeds, many beautiful wildflowers. And I see this approach where, we spread the seeds. It's a language so that we all clinicians and families and youth come with their own unique strengths and resources, and how they develop and how they grow in their particular context is what I hope to facilitate. And sort of everyone can leave with their own beautiful flowers. We have this bouquet. But I have found this, I work also in a school with residential kids. I work across the board. And as a child psychiatrist, we often see the most challenging kiddos and families. And one of the things that I've really found so inspiring about this approach is how hopeful it is, how pragmatic it is. And what I have found unique with this approach, or particularly helpful, is how well these skills work towards engaging youth and families simultaneously. Because in order to do any kind of effective treatment, we need to be able to engage our youth and families. And I think the ability to kind of look at how people solve their problems is a result of their personal and social strengths and resources. And we often in the field are very, and not even just in the field, in general, we're more fluent, I'd like to say, in problem talk. And so we're fluent in what's wrong and how to fix it, and where's the diagnosis, and this is what you need to do to fix it. Whereas when you really look at some of the research also by Michael Lambert, that when you look at strengths and resources and engagement, up to 70% of effective treatment comes from looking at what are the client's resources and strengths. And it sounds simple, and I think that's what can be challenging in training. It sounds simple to say, well, I ask what the children are good at. There's a lot more skill involved in that. And I think that's what this paradigm shift can be. Simple, yet Steve used to say, it's simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. So I have found this approach incredibly hopeful. And one of the reasons, I love it so much and want to sort of spread the news, if you will, is basically it works. I mean, I find it really helpful and pragmatic. And I think we often talk in the field about how to instill hope, which is one of the most important things we do as a field. But then how to do that? What questions do we ask? How do we start a conversation? How do we navigate a social context? Who's most important in their life? How do we enhance not only the individual strengths, but the relational strengths, and really look at the context? And what I love about the in-home therapy model, I think, and what you're doing is how context unique it is. So you go into the homes and you look at who's involved, who are the important people in this child's life, how are we going to use those social strengths, how are they going to know the child's doing better, what is the family and the system done and are doing that have worked, and how can we look at their hopes moving forward? I mean, often when you think about language, we think about, well, tell me the problem here and what brought you to therapy. Well, I never even asked that question. It's not even in my lexicon. Instead, I ask, what are your best hopes? So by the time this therapy team, we have 3 to 6 months, by the time we leave, you can say, well, this was helpful. This made a difference. Things are better for us. And really engaging collaboratively with with the youth, with the family, with whoever that family is, quote, that may not be your typical family. So I just find it a very, practical skill. And I think often we're trained, like I said, in more of the problem-focused language. So when I go in and do a training, I will assume we're all fluent in that. But much like you learn a new language, whether you learn Mandarin or German or whatever it is you're learning, it takes practice. And I think because you're engaging the agency in this training, what is always exciting for me is then there's opportunity to practice the fluency in the language with one another.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, totally. And I think you bring up a great point, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later in terms of follow-up and coaching. But I think one of the things that we're finding, not just in in-home work, but working across the board, across interventions, is if we don't have people supporting the practitioner on the ground with, robust supervision, or in some cases, really, it's more coaching. I think supervision might carry a different connotation for many folks. So, I think we'll talk a little bit about that before we wrap up, the opportunities that there might be for people to get some ongoing stuff. Could you say a little bit, before we go on to our kind of our next area, could you say a little bit about the research associated?
So I have a slide somewhere in there, but this is an evidence-based treatment, and there right now there's been over now 100 empirical studies of the effectiveness, and there's thousands of, literally thousands of research studies. There's 10 meta-analyses now currently. The effect sizes that we're looking at are similar across the board to in CBT, interpersonal therapy. The difference is the number of sessions is briefer. So it's generally shorter of duration. And also, I think what's really important is this approach does no harm. I mean, there are some therapeutic approaches that can have side effects, if you will. So I think it's a very practical approach. It's now in SAMHSA under substance abuse treatment in brief evidence-based therapies for substance abuse as well. So I think it's in general the effect sizes are similar, 60+%. And I think that because of this, it's a really good first choice. And it's very practical. I mean, I think one of the other things that when you look at the evidence-based is what I enjoy about training is you can teach this approach transdisciplinary. And what I mean by that is because it's a language, like you can teach German to people who are teachers or businessmen or parents or whatever. So what I think is really exciting about it is the transdisciplinary approach, which also I think for me, it's not that we're going to do solution focused and not do anything else.
Right.
I see it as a meta approach in which we use the language, whether we do DBT or CBT, but how do we use language and incorporate a solution-focused language in those approaches? So, of course, you don't want to throw out all the skills that clinicians use. It's how we can translate the language. And I think that's another piece of it.
Great.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And, Rick kind of referred to the term a couple of times, resilience. You referred to hope. I think both of those words are part of the same desired outcome, if you will, for both of these approaches. But I'm wondering if you could just, and if you want to just talk to each other about this, that would make sense too. But we have two different but related and complementary interventions. Can you talk a little bit about where you see the fit of IHBT with solution focus and vice versa? Like, why is it a good fit? I mean, I'm assuming because you're coming here,
Yes.
that assumptions and decisions were
Yes.
made that this was a good fit. So
I think it's a great fit for a number of reasons. One is, again, looking at the critical need to engage simultaneously. I mean, on the surface, when you enter a family's home, right, the mom is like, oh my God, this child has a litany of problems. Yeah. And the child is there saying, I don't know why you're here, get out. Or it could be the family that doesn't. So I think the first thing is some of the practical skills regarding engagement. So tell me who's most important in your life? What do you most appreciate about one another? What do you enjoy? What do you do together? What are you good at? It starts the conversation by activating resources. And so I think entering someone's home is a very privileged thing to do. Mm-hmm. You know, you're entering their space. So I think how you enter that space and appreciate their home and the art on the wall, or how they're welcoming, or whatever ways that you can enter that space make a difference. And I think the solution-focused approach really attends to how you enter the conversational space, mm-hmm. and how you proceed through the space. Yeah. And I think the other piece that's really important is really attending to the details of the social context. Who are these people important in their life, whether it's pets or people who've died, or the DYS worker, or maybe it's the probation officer, or maybe it's one custodian in the school, whoever that is, we don't know. But so entering again in that in-home systems of care approach, really attending to building the relational context in a strength-based way, and building those. So I think the other piece, I think that we use a lot of scaling in solution-focused therapy, which can really concretize very small, doable, actionable steps. And scaling solutions is another way to limit language confusion, and can really help pay attention to what's working in small steps. And so it's I think and also useful in monitoring progress. So I think it's a natural fit, mm-hmm. And pragmatic for the clinicians as well as the families.
Yeah. And Rick, I've heard you talk, a lot about kind of that that value and honoring of being in people's homes, and how that's a part of the IHBT philosophy. And, I hear Anne, reflecting that as well. So again, from your perspective, since you're looking at the big picture in terms of Ohio practitioners, where do you see the fit? Where do you see practitioners gaining on this?
Yeah, that's well put, Patrick. In terms of the clinicians and the practitioners in the field, I think, Ann, you framed it nicely. I think we want, that language of hope, the language of solutions, to be, we want them to be fluent, if you will, in that. When, what Patrick is mentioning in terms of, as we enter a home, we enter, a term we use is respectful humility. We try to enter as not only a guest of the home, certainly a professional, but also a student of the family's journey and culture. And so there's this, we need to enter respectfully, but also be able to validate the journey and the values of the family. And so from that standpoint, it is both, immersed in system of care, but it's also obviously immersed in, what I often tell the family, or practitioners, we need to hold the hope until the family can hold the hope. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes we might find pieces and parts that, we find encouraging, but the family hasn't necessarily they're not in the same place we are yet. And so partly what we have to do is translate that hope to them. And it could, and you know, as Ann was saying, it's very incremental change. It's very slow, and yet when it happens, how do we also celebrate that that change?
I mean, and I don't know, to just jump in, I think to fit with that is the approach really looks closely at what questions are asked, how to construct questions that enhance hope, how to incorporate a client's language into those questions. And I think a big part of what all of us do as clinicians is notice. And often those positive opportunities, or what we can call micro positive differences, are often missed because they're just gone by, because there's such an inundation of problems, or I like to say challenges. There's no problems, only challenges. But so I think there is, when you say you hold, I love that, how you hold the hope. I think part of holding the hope is really meticulously listening to those micro differences, and then learning skills around how to question and amplify those differences. And that can hold the hope and spread the hope through the use of a conversation. So the conversational skills needed to both start, initiate, and maintain a conversation like this, they're skills. They're not necessarily just, you know, we need to learn them.
Right. Well, you know, it's kind of a nice segue to the April 25 and 26 training that you're going to do. Can you talk just a little bit about what participants might expect in that training?
Well, my hope is, my best hope for trainings is always that when participants leave, they can say it was worth their time, and that they can go and immediately practice some of the skills they've learned. So when I teach this, I think one of the challenges with learning this, like any language, and I don't know if either of you are multilingual, but you learn languages basically through practice, talking with others. And you learn language also by having some basic grammar, which sounds kind of, and I'm a language nerd. I like to say I'm a language nerd. There's certain verbs, there's certain construction of questions that really do help. So my hope is that through both some didactic, but I have many videos, and then also really practicing cases, that's the best way. And then my hope is that when the clinicians leave, they can practice some of that, because really how we learn this, it's like if you go to class for German for an hour, that's not going to sustain it. What sustains it is to keep talking it and practicing it and using it. And so my hope is that when they leave, they can have some really practical tools to try that day with whoever they see.
So Rick, again, from kind of that macro point of view, bringing together people from across the state, what's your hope for those practitioners as they exit the second day? What would be your best hope for what they would gain?
You know, my hope for the practitioners, you know, we want to see a solution-focused approach, you know, integrated into the practice of intensive home-based across the state. Again, we've always felt it was always a good fit. You know, certainly in our training, we talk this way. I think this is our, you know, our coming back at this in a more in-depth way to, I'm going to use a big word, inculcate, you know, to really push it into practice at the practice level. And I think we want to follow up with some coaching and consultation as it relates to that as well.
Okay. So Ann, in your in the outline implementation of solution-focused therapy, what are briefly some of the options that individual agencies might want to look at post the 2-day training.
Sure. I think, post-training, it's always helpful to kind of get, I think, participants' feedback. Was it helpful or not? What did they gain from it? What do they think would be most helpful? Because I think when you look at agencies, just like, cacti grow in Arizona, but not in New England, especially in February.
Yes.
How do I co-construct a program that fits within the context of your agency? So there are a number of options. I think one is to really kind of look at who's interested in it. Like, are there people that want to continue this? We have options for certification. I mean, you obviously don't need to be certified to practice this, but some people like that extra rigor.
Sure.
And then our certification program is, we're part of the Alliance for Training Institutes, the International Alliance for Solution-Focused Training Institutes. So there are certification guidelines that were created through them that we follow. In order to get certified, if that would be something you'd want, that's one avenue. We are doing a number of ways to do that. Right now, we're doing actually some through Zoom, through this platform. We're actually doing synchronous every other week, 2-hour sort of coaching, if you will. And then between those times, we have a whole manual of homework exercises and practice exercises that are discussed so that there's sort of a manualized way to get certified. You have to do X, Y, and Z. And then at the end, people provide presentations on how they have used solution-focused therapy in their particular context. So it becomes contextualized. We also do just, you don't need to get certified, like I said. So I have other agencies, they just kind of come online once a month for a few hours to talk about cases, and it's a more general approach. Now, all the hours that for certification that you have in real time, whether I'm there or real time like we're talking, do go towards certification. You need a certain number of hours. So you could do that as an agency if there's individual people that want to do that. So our best hope through the Institute is we're really working on then a Train the Trainer program, which is even more rigorous beyond that, just to make sure we're staying true to the fidelity of the model, and the training program for Train the Trainer is rigorous. So there's a number of different options. We can also go out there. I've done it different ways, where I've done it virtually, and then I've also done it where I go out a number of times over a year. So it depends what your hopes are as for your agency.
Right. So it sounds like there's opportunity to actually kind of tailor a number of options, which is really important, because like we said, that sustainability and that continuity is a pretty important piece.
Yes.
This has been a really good pre-conversation to the April training. I'm wondering if either of you have any thoughts you want to wrap up with before we conclude, and share any final thoughts. Rick?
Well, Patrick, I'm just very excited to bring Dr. Lutz in to Ohio. As I said earlier, our goal is to always increase skills, practitioner skills, working with youth and families in particular, working with youth and families who have multiple challenges across multiple systems. Because we have found over time that, if we stay in the game with the family long enough, we can find solutions and help them find solutions and help them continue with the solutions. So we're very excited to bring this approach and hope to spread competencies in the approach for our clinicians.
Great. And any final thoughts?
I'm just excited to meet you all and thrilled about this opportunity. I think it's just very exciting to be able to learn from your agency and learn what you're doing and work together to really help these youth and families and the communities in which they're a part of. It's very exciting to make a difference.
Great.
Together.
We are looking forward to your visit to Ohio. We will have, I'm sure, a robust group of folks anxious to, expand their skill sets. So we're thrilled. And let me just remind people that the training will be in Columbus on April 25th and 26th. And for further information about the training, go to www.IHBTOhio, that's one word, IHBTOhio.org. And you will find more information about Dr. Lutz and solution-focused therapy, as well as information related to the actual training on those 2 days. So Rick, thank you, and we will look forward to a great training in a couple of months.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Mm-hmm.